Hi guys, just a reminder as I finish posting your assignment, all of these assignments are going to lock 10 days after they were originally due. So this assignment for tomorrow is due the 29th of October. That means on the 12th of November, it is going to be locked, not to be opened again. So that is another reminder that you need to be completing your missing work. Okay, if you are not caught up, it's time to get caught up. Do it now before those assignments locked. So far, we have watched, you should have watched the Thinking Like a Mountain video and watched this How Wolves Change the River. Isn't that awesome? How they're taking out one species of an ecosystem. Not awesome, it's kind of bad. Taking out one ecosystem can really wreak havoc on the entire thing. As promised, we're going to go ahead and do these notes. So we're talking about relationships. We've got to talk about symbiosis. Defined, it is the interaction between two different organisms where at least one species benefits. So when we're studying relationships, we've got to talk about symbiosis. Think interactions between two organisms. At least when one of them benefits, you'll see that not all of them are so lucky where they get to benefit. Our first type of relationship, remember pause if you need to, is parasitism. So a relationship, this is a relationship where one species benefits and the other is unfortunately harmed. So our example here is the deer and the deer tick. The deer unfortunately does not benefit, but the tick does. It gets the nutrients it needs from the deer, and the deer is not only unaffected, it is harmed because the tick is taking its blood for nutrients, as well as possibly passing on diseases and parasites to that deer, like we talked about when we studied our parasitic organisms. So this should be review for you some of the other parasitic organisms that we talked about when we were doing our disease unit was the mistletoe, that's a tree parasite. We talked a lot about the mosquito, how it's a parasite on us, but it is also the host for Plasmodium, which is a protozoa that causes malaria. So the Plasmodium parasites the mosquito, and then the mosquito parasites the human, and then the Plasmodium parasites the human when you get malaria. And just a fun fact, or not a fun fact, just a reminder of where we've been and that we've already talked about parasitism. The others we haven't talked about though. So mutualism, both organisms get to benefit in this relationship. So both are benefiting. We've got two green thumbs up. The bee benefits as well as the flower. So when the bee goes and gets the bee uses some of the nectar. The bee uses some of the nectar from the flower. It eats it. But as the bee is eating the nectar, it's also getting all the pollen. If you've ever seen the bee movie, it's getting all the pollen all over it from that flower. And then as it flies on to another flower, the pollen is going to be spread to them. So the trees are going to be able to reproduce, or the flowers, whatever it is, they'll be able to reproduce, and that's all because of the bee. So they actually both benefit from this relationship. And our last relationship that we've got to talk about is commensalism. It's where one, and I had to put this, it's in green, so you just really couldn't read it, but it's where a relationship where one species benefits and the other is neither benefited or harmed. That's why it's a yellow, thumbs to the side. Our example here is the barnacle and the whale. So the barnacles hitch a ride on the whale, getting all the nutrients they need as they filter feed, but the whale is not really benefited one way or another. So it doesn't really bother the whale, it's not hurting them, but it's doing lots of good things for those barnacles that need to filter feed to get the nutrients they need. Other examples of, well, I don't want to give you too many examples because I've got a game for you in just a little second. Okay, so those are the main three types of relationships. We also talked about another one, which I wanted you to define at the bottom of your notes, predation. So it's when one organism eats another. We did a whole lab on that. The moral of the lab, go back and watch the video with the chart. As the prey that reaches the prey and predator population reach a point, a cyclic cycle actually, that where at first there's not enough prey for the predator, so the predator dies, and then the prey is able to reproduce. But once it finally reproduces really well, then the predator population will be able to eat, so they increase until eventually the predator population will reach a point where they're eating too much of the prey. The prey population will fall to those devastating lows again, which will cause the predator to also fall in population. Go back and watch the video of me explaining either the Zoom or the introduction video for Wednesday. That'll help you understand that a little bit more. But predation is one organism eating another. So you guys eating a hamburger or me eating, you could kind of classify this as me eating like a salad. But for the most part, when we talk about predation, there's a sense of like stalking your prey. If you think of the big cats, hunting for your prey. So it's less so plants like the herbivores having predation, but could be as well. One could argue that me eating a salad is a form of predation. And our last type of relationship is called competition. So this, I just wanted to clearly define this for you. It happens when organisms compete for resources. So if I am eating a salad and the bunny is also eating a salad or the grass, then we're competing for the same resource. If they're limited enough to where there's not a lot of grass for me or the rabbit, one of the species is going to win out over the other. And that's usually how we get natural selection, or sometimes that's a part of natural selection, is this competition. So it's when resources are limited and both many types of organisms compete for the same resources. You could say that we're all in competition for one another, breathing the same air, because we're all trying to breathe the same air and there's a limited number of it. But that's less so. You could think about money as a competition for resources. We're all trying to get money. There's only a limited amount of it. But please do try to think of it as the resources. So like the resources are things that animals need or organisms in order to survive. Like us, water, shelter, air, water, shelter, food, are the three main resources that we need, and air, that's a given. For other organisms, like if I have a fish tank and I have like 5 fish and I only put one piece of food in, some organisms, some of the fish might die because there's not enough food. Same type of deal happens out in nature on a much larger scale. Now, competition can either result in the death of species or organisms that aren't winning. So the ones that are not getting food, they're either going to die or they're going to move on to another place where competition is not as difficult or as lofty. And I wanted to go through the types of resources with you, or what actually limits the population size of, the size of a population. So we say in science that this is something called a limiting factor, and it's something that limits or prohibits growth of a population. We talked about some of the abiotic factors that we see out in our organism, or out in our environment, are air and water. So those are both air. Clean air, maybe, yes. Maybe one day we'll get to the point where we're in competition for air. But water, definitely. So there's a limited amount of water out in an ecosystem. That's something that's going to limit how big your populations can grow. We further break down limiting factors into density-dependent and density-independent factors. A density-dependent factor or limiting factor is something that affects a large population strongly. So the smaller the population, the less these will kind of wreak havoc on. So when you're thinking about this, think about disease and parasites, because we learned that a lot of the parasites that we have are actually diseases, or a lot of the diseases we have are actually parasites, and competition. So the larger a population gets, the more trouble they're going to have with competition, because the more limited of the resources. The larger a population gets, the more likely they are to be susceptible to disease and parasitism, right? Because, that's one of the reasons why we're quarantined right now. If you think about it, we're trying to separate the populations of humans. So if we're all together in a a movie theater or something, we're more likely to spread our diseases than if we were all watching the same movie but at home, because there's less people to spread the disease from place to place. And then we also have, this is an example of disease. This is a canker on a tree. So it's some type of way the disease has gotten into the tree. It could just be that little part, but they're called cankers, and they look like bubbles or little some people call them tree cancer, but they're not really. They're just a part of the bark that has died and decayed, and it's actually pretty dangerous to the tree. So if this is on a limb, it could lose the limb that's off of this. So if this was a limb right here and the tree trunk was right here, it could lose all of this, but I think this is actually the tree trunk. So this tree has the potential to lose from here up on its tree. So it's really dangerous for the trees. But that's just an example of a density-dependent limiting factor. Remember, limiting factor is something that limits or prohibits population growth. And then density-independent factors, they affect all populations evenly no matter the size. So my example right here is fire. Fire is something that no matter what size your population is, it's not like fire says, oh, you have 20 bunnies in your population, I'm going to skip over you. No, that's not how it works. Fire burns everything in its path. For the most part, these are abiotic factors, such as weather changes, like hurricanes. A hurricane isn't going to stop at Jones Lake and count the deer and be like, oh, you don't have enough deer for me to affect you. No, a hurricane comes through no matter what size the population is and wreaks havoc. Human activities are also a common kind of density-independent factors, such as pollution. The pollutants are going to affect a small population just as much as they'll affect a large population, and natural disasters like fire. All right, I have a little quiz your knowledge here. Predation and drought. Do you think predation is a density-dependent or density-independent factor? I hope you answered density-dependent. Predation, definitely, you saw that with your lab. The more prey I have, the stronger the predators are going to target my population. Drought, what do we think? Density-dependent or density-independent? It's actually a density-independent factor, so no matter whether the population is large or small, drought's going to affect them. And then I've got a video I posted for you on symbiotic relationships just to kind of fill in your knowledge a little bit more and maybe give you some examples that I didn't talk about. So go ahead and watch that on your own time. And then lastly, I've got a little quiz your knowledge. This is going to be harder over the computer screen. Maybe we'll try it again if you come back face to face. But
welcome to.
Oh, we already did that. Let's go through. This is from the lab the other day. That's the chart I was talking about. So the prey, again, actually, you know, I'm not going to, yes I am. The prey population right here, this orange line, was so small that it couldn't support the predator population into growth. If they were surviving, they were just barely surviving, getting enough food to support only themselves. They weren't reproducing. But as the prey population increased, because there weren't that many predators, it actually caused an increase in the amount of predators because there was more food to eat. So they were better able to support a growing population. Now, eventually the predator population reached a point where it was preying too much on the prey. They were eating too much, and the bunnies just couldn't reproduce at a rate that still allowed for that growth, so they drastically dropped. We lost bunnies like crazy because there were too many predators. And then because the bunny population dropped, the predator population also dropped because their food was being limited. Good. Now, predation, again, a reminder, is an example of a density-dependent limiting factor. With the remaining seconds, I'm going to go through a couple of pictures for you, and I would like you to identify whether you think it is commensalism, predator-prey relationship, mutualism, or parasitism. So here we've got a plant root, and these little white things coming out of it are called fungus, or they're fungus. What do we think? This one is actually mutualism, and those are mycorrhizae. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but they are actually funguses. They've evolved a mutual relationship in which the fungus brings in nitrogen to the plant. And that's all we have time for.